philosopher, named after a British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar. He studied primate brains and their behavior in groups, and he found something that will change the way you think about the world. He found that the larger the primate's neocortex, the larger the communities it formed. It takes a lot of brain to process all of the relationships in a complex society, you see. When primates find themselves in groups larger than what their brains can handle, the system breaks down. Factions form. Wars break out. Now, and do pay attention, because this is crucial. You can actually look at a primate brain and, knowing nothing else about what species it came from, you can predict how big their tribes are. Does someone have a watch? Because when you told him 15 minutes, I'm not sure if he's going to take that as a literal 15 minutes, or we'll deal with him in a moment, but I take your point. The salient issue here is that every primate has a number. Marconi gestured to the crowd gathering outside the fence. Including those primates out there, including you and I. Based on the size of a human's neocortex, that number is about 150. That's how many other humans we can recognize before we max out our connections. With some variability among individuals, of course. That is our maximum capacity for sympathy. I stared at him. I said, "Wait, really? Like there's an actual part of our brain that dictates how many people we can tolerate before we start acting like assholes? Congratulations! Now you know the single reason why the world is the way it is. You see the problem right away. Everything we do requires cooperation in groups larger than 150. Governments, corporations, society as a whole, and we are physically incapable of handling it. So every moment of the day we urgently try to separate everyone on Earth into two groups, those inside the sphere of sympathy and those outside, black versus white, liberal versus conservative, Muslim versus Christian, Lakers fan versus Celtics fan, with us or against us, infected versus clean. We simplify tens of millions of individuals down into simplistic stereotypes so that they hold the space of only one individual in our limited available memory slots. And here is the key. Those who lie outside the circle are not human. We lack the capacity to recognize them as such. This is why you feel worse about your girlfriend cutting her finger than you do about an earthquake in Afghanistan that kills 100,000 people. This is what makes genocide possible. This is what makes it possible for a CEO to sign off on a policy that will poison a river in Malaysia and create 10,000 deformed infants. Because of this limitation in the mental hardware, those Malaysians may as well be ants. I stared at the crowd outside and rubbed my forehead. Or monsters. Now you're getting it. It's the same as how that crowd out there doesn't see us as human. The way the rest of the country won't see anyone inside city limits as human. The way the rest of the world soon won't regard anyone in this country as human. The paranoia rippling outward until the whole planet is engulfed. This infection, this parasite that dehumanizes the host but is utterly undetectable, it is perfectly designed to play on this fundamental flaw, this limitation in our hardware. That will be the real infection. Marconi emptied his pipe into a bedpan and pulled out a bag of tobacco. Which brings us back to the Tower of Babel. Humans were always destined to be derailed by this limitation in our ability to cooperate. At some specific point, determined by the overall size of the population on the planet and a host of other factors, we will destroy ourselves. That is the Babel threshold. The point at which the species-wide exhaustion of human sympathy reaches critical mass. And you think this whole thing, starting with me finding a giant alien spider in my bed, was their plan to trigger that event? He nodded. The parasite's ability to stay undercover indefinitely, the infected showing absolutely no symptoms. It's perfection. Anyone can be infected at any moment, anywhere in the world. If you want to see what the future of life on planet Earth looks like, simply take a glance out that window. I found a chair and collapsed into it. There was a harsh knock on the door behind me. From behind the door, Owen said,
"It's been long enough, Doc."
5 more minutes won't change anything, Mr. Barber. Lowering my voice, I said, "Wait, you wrote a book about this happening before it happened? Damn, why didn't you send me a copy?" "You shouldn't have needed a book to see this coming. No one should have. This is what they've been building toward since civilization began, accelerating as it got closer, like the last sand running from an hourglass. Look at the games children play now. The average child has killed 10,000 men on a video game screen by the time he enters high school, reinforcing that lesson 1 button press at a time. The shapes at the other end of your gun are not human. And when news of the infection spread, what did the world immediately call the infected? Zombies. Exactly. Our culture's most perfect creation. An enemy you are absolutely, morally correct in killing because they are already dead. Why, you are doing them a favor by smashing in their skulls. We as a species were so primed for this that to get combustion, they only needed the tiniest spark. It actually happened sooner than I expected, but—" He shrugged as he lit his pipe, as if to say, "Can't be right every time." I said, "Well, you took a long time to say what I pretty much already knew. We're screwed. I mean, to be clear, we're rooting for the bombs, right? That's the only way to satisfy the paranoia? Let them blow all this to shit on live TV while the mob out there cheers." Marconi puffed on his pipe and stared out the window. I said, "I mean, we absolutely cannot let that part get out, right? The fact that the zombies are undetectable until they're biting your brain, that fact needs to die with the quarantine, otherwise it's going to be a global lynch mob out there, which means making sure none of them get out, even if innocents die in the process. I mean, it's shitty, but that's all we can do. Err on the side of overkill, right?" Marconi said, "The sedative is running out. One of my infected patients woke up." I said, "Jesus, really? Did you—" "I've been talking to him all morning. He's still strapped to his bed. I calmly explained to him the situation, and he asked me to leave the restraints on. He said it was the only responsible thing. What do you make of that?" I don't know. But you can't just leave him like—" "You're right. I can't. I mean, it's just a matter of time, right? Until he monsters out and kills who knows how many people?" Marconi studied me. Owen banged on the door again. Marconi said, "We're coming." 2 hours, 30 minutes until the aerial bombing of
Undisclosed.
To Tight Pants, a.k.a. Jimmy Dupree, John said, "So, we know for sure now? They're going to bomb it?" Jimmy nodded. "You're the one who was asking earlier about the innocent people inside quarantine." "Got a friend in there." "No, you don't. What this is, with the bombs, is a mercy killing. Nothing more. You need to get that straight." Staring through the windshield at the fence down the street, John nodded. Dupree said, "Don't know if you heard the shots last night, but there was an outbreak from the quarantine. Bunch of 'em found an old utility tunnel that the government, in its infinite wisdom, failed to spot on the blueprints. Few dozen tried to get out. Looked like some militia tried to stand their ground and got themselves torn to pieces in the process. Don't got any idea how many zombies got out into the wild, but I spent my night disposing of 30 bodies. There'll be more, a lot more, if they don't do something about that quarantine. It's a bag of live snakes in a nursery. Well, word finally filtered in from the feds at the perimeter. The bomb drops at noon. We just gotta keep it secure until then. Then this whole flippin' nightmare'll be over. And if noon comes and nothing happens, we're gonna surround this place and pour bullets into that fence until nothing on the other side draws air. 2 hours, 25 minutes until the aerial bombing of
undisclosed.
I couldn't help but notice that Owen had the Reds build up the fire. Looked like they had found some more wooden pallets somewhere. That shit really burned. To Owen, I said, "You know what? I never got to sit down and write that note to my girlfriend. Marconi used up all my time, and all he did was give me a chili recipe. Do you want it?" He didn't answer. It was a beautiful morning, though some clouds were moving in. I could actually hear birds chirping somewhere. Birds don't give a shit about the apocalypse any more than we'd care about some species of bird going extinct in the Amazon, which had probably happened twice already this morning. All of the Reds were awake and standing around me. I looked back at the hospital entrance and saw a smattering of Greens standing there. I glanced up at the roof, and there were the rest of them, lined up along the ledge and looking down. From behind me, Marconi said, "Mr. Barber, I don't know if you can hear the commotion on the other side of the fencing, but we do appear to have larger problems here."
Owen said, "With all due respect, Doc, I'm not a fucking idiot. Those people are about to riot out there because they figured out this quarantine isn't secure, thanks to last night's breakout. And guess who we have to thank for that?"
"Killing David here will not assuage their panic. It will in fact accomplish nothing except to confirm their worst fears about us."
"Attention!"
Everybody turned toward the booming sound of a voice coming from a public address system.
"Please move 1,000 feet away from the quarantine fence. For your safety, please withdraw from the quarantine perimeter to a distance of at least 1,000 feet.
2 hours, 20 minutes until the aerial bombing of undisclosed. John heard the PA system outside the fence announcing something he couldn't quite make out from inside the truck. Warning the crowd away from the gates, probably. He pulled the tow truck up through the quarantine crowd, gently knocking over a "Do not cross by order of Reaper, highly infectious, trespassers will be shot on sight" sign. Beyond it were the 4-foot-high concrete barricades. Beyond them was an unmanned jeep with a mounted gun that John assumed would shoot anyone who touched the fence. Beyond it, the fence itself. For all he knew, Dave could be no more than 50 feet away on the other side of that chain link. A cheap pair of bolt cutters would get through it in 2 minutes, but it might as well be the center of the earth. He needed a drink. They had a little over 2 hours until either the army incinerated this place or the entire town went apeshit on it. 2+ hours in which to accomplish what? The crowd was actually moving back, to his surprise, and then it dawned on him that the military was trying to get the rubberneckers out of the blast radius of whatever they were going to drop on this place. He wondered if he was close enough to be engulfed by whatever came streaking down from the sky. He threw the truck into park. The PA system repeated its message. John lit one of his last 2 cigarettes. He twiddled with the levers on the console. He heard a humming from behind him, and a shadow inched across the cab. Oh, hey! He'd figured out how to work the stupid ramp mechanism. It'd have been nice to have done that before he was forced to steal some guy's tow truck, but that was how every single possible thing had gone so far in this situation. Just a little bit behind the curve, a little slow to figure out the right thing. Story of his fucking life. John realized, at the very least, he needed to get this poor bastard's tow truck out of the blast zone, and that leaving it here would be a major dick move considering he no longer needed it. John got out and climbed up onto the tilted truck bed, released the cable that secured the caddy, and got behind the wheel. He twisted the ignition and woke up the bear under the hood. He reversed off the truck bed, flattening out on the street below. Credence loudly assured him that a bad moon was rising. 2 hours, 15 minutes until the aerial bombing of undisclosed. Marconi was trying to voice another objection, but Owen wasn't listening. His eyes never left mine. He cut off Marconi in mid-sentence and said,
"All these people in here, all those Greens, and look, you got exactly one guy standing up for you. Look up at all the Greens up there, watching this from the roof. Notice how none of them came down to advocate on your behalf? None of them are throwing themselves in front of you saying, 'You take him, you gotta take me too.' You know why? Because every single one of them knows you wouldn't do it for them."
2 hours, 14 minutes until the aerial bombing of
Undisclosed.
John backed up in the caddy and kept backing up, farther and farther down the street, the tow truck and its tilted bed shrinking in his windshield. He stopped. He thought. He flicked his cigarette out of the window. He buckled his seatbelt. 2 hours, 10 minutes until the aerial bombing of
Undisclosed.
Owen said, "Dude, this is going to be lost on you, but I need to say it, because we are going to die, Wong. Don't think I don't understand that. I know the feds aren't going to let us out of this place. So let me say my bit. I have kept the order in this quarantine since the day the feds pussied out of here. All in all, I'd say it's the best thing I ever done in my life. Maybe the only positive thing I've ever done. And that's all right. Whether it's bombs in here or being torn apart by the mob out there, I will stand before the good Lord and say that I held things together as long as I could. And my final act is to declare you guilty for the deaths of 30 men and women and the probable deaths of 270 more. I find you guilty of committing the only real sin Jesus ever asked us not to commit. The sin of not giving a shit about anyone but yourself. Doc, step aside." From behind Owen, somebody said, "They're having a block party out there. Listen." "What?" "They're playing music. Creedence." They were turning up the volume, too. Bad Moon Rising swelled in the distance, getting louder and louder, and under it was another sound, a terrible noise like a mechanical Chewbacca that fell into a rock-crushing machine. At that moment, John's Cadillac came soaring through the air. It cleared the first fence and almost cleared the second. The rear tires caught the razor wire and started unspooling it from the top of the fence, trailing behind the falling caddy like the streamers on a kite. Everyone scattered. The grill of the caddy plunged right into the middle of the bonfire, scattering smoke and flames and bones to the wind. The Cadillac finally bounced and jolted to a stop among a rain of burning human skulls. The voice of John Fogarty garbled and died. The driver's door opened, and John flung himself out, clutching a sawed-off shotgun. He screamed, "Did somebody order some fucking prison break with a side of shotgun?" The transcript of an exchange between UAV drone operator Captain Shane McInnes, Guardian, and Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Eagleson, Yankee 7-9, on the morning of November 15th, 0955 hours. Guardian. Be advised, a vehicle has breached the quarantine fence along the western side. I repeat, a vehicle, appears to be a civilian passenger car, has breached the fence. Yankee 7-9. Guardian. Are we looking at containment failure here? Guardian. Negative, Yankee, the fence appears to be intact. Yankee 7-9. Okay, I need clarification, Guardian. I thought you said it had been breached by a vehicle. Guardian. Affirmative. There is a vehicle inside the fence. The driver has exited. Yankee 7-9. Then how is the fence still intact, Guardian? Guardian. It, appears he went over. Yankee 7-9. He what? Guardian. Yankee, I think he ramped it. There's, some kind of a truck with a platform on the back, and I think he used it as a ramp. Yankee 7-9. All right. Did you say you had a clear shot at the driver? 2 hours, 5 minutes until the aerial bombing of
Undisclosed.
John grabbed my shoulders and screamed into my face, "Dave! Are you in there? It's me, John! I am your friend! Can you understand me?" Why are you talking like that? I looked inside the caddy. John had come alone. Where's Amy? I don't know. Outside town, I think. Oh, thank God. Or not. I actually don't know. Owen strode up and kicked aside a smoldering skull. He raised the pistol. John raised his shotgun. Their eyes met. John said, "Owen? What the hell are you doing here?"
"You are one crazy son of a bitch, John."
To me, John said, "Is he infected?" "I don't think so." Owen said,
"Ain't none of us infected."
I said, "We don't know that." John said, "Well, whatever. Everybody needs to get the hell out of here. By lunchtime, this is all going to be a crater. Did you hear the announcement out there, Owen?" I said, "Wait, do you two know each other?" "Yeah, remember I said I was doing setup for him. This is DJ O-Funk." To Owen, he said, "Hell, I thought you'd be out there on Daryl's farm riding this thing out."
"I was. I went into town on a beer run and got scooped up by the feds. I punched one of those guys in the spacesuits, and I guess they took that as a sign of an infection."
I noticed the rest of the inmates were staring at us, shell-shocked, as we held this conversation next to the crashed caddy and among the scattered pile of smoking human remains. It finally occurred to me to turn my eyes up to the circling drones, wondering if they were zeroing in on our skulls right now. I had a vague thought that we should run for cover, but the entrance to the hospital was 100 feet away. It'd be a nice, leisurely couple of shots for some guy sitting at a console out in the desert. We could duck in the car, but the drone was also equipped with the kind of rockets that could turn it into 2 tons of burning steel confetti. Actually, why hasn't he shot us already? Dr. Marconi walked up and John glanced at him. "Doc? You been here the whole time?" "John, I would ask you what you are doing, but I fear you would actually tell me." "I'm just here to get Dave. Now we're going to get in my caddy, and I'm going to drive a caddy-shaped hole in that fence over there. The rest of you can walk right out behind us. Once out, you will owe me a case of beer, each of you." Owen said,
"You didn't see the big fucking guns lined up outside? They'll turn you into chunks in 2 seconds.
"I didn't see any big fucking guns. I saw a bunch of little fucking guns. I don't think they were anticipating Cadillac-driving zombies, but either way, you need to find a way out of here before they bomb the place." John ducked into the caddy and said, "Oh, Owen, did paychecks go out last week before this all happened?" Owen glanced at me, then John, and said,
"How the fuck did you two ever find each other?"
To me, John asked, "You coming?" I took to the passenger seat. The caddy seemed to be listing somewhat, and steam was oozing from under the hood, but the engine was still running, so that was good. John said, "Marconi, there's room in the back seat." Marconi leaned in and said, "I assume your plan didn't progress beyond this exact moment." "I try to take it one step at a time." Marconi shifted his eyes to me and said, "Remember what I said?" "Yeah, the Babylon Protocol." He started to correct me, but instead said, "There is a way to beat it, but with God as my witness, I do not know how any of us will get the chance. Just tell me what we need to do. Think it through. Think about the symbols we rally around. Think about what binds people together. Just fucking tell me." "I think you already know. David, there needs to be a sacrifice." "A sacrifice? Why?" "Think it through." "What? Like somebody has to die? One of us?" Marconi backed away and said, "Go, before the drone operators finally make sense of what they're seeing and open fire." We buckled our seatbelts. John threw the caddy into reverse. He backed up, rolling through the fire pit, knocking aside a wheelchair. He cranked the wheel and got the caddy pointing behind the building, not far from the strip of woods John and I had escaped through on that first night, before there was a big-ass fence there. The crowd of inmates in front of us split like the Red Sea. John floored it. The back tires dug down into the mud. We launched forward, barreling toward a section of fence bearing the words, "Flame-Grilled Friday at Country Kitchen." I braced my hands against the dashboard and heard myself screaming. The fence never stood a chance. The hood bashed through the first layer, whipping down the layer of plastic sheeting. The fencing was still raking its way down the rear windshield when we hit the second layer of fence, smashing a wooden pole in two, ripping through the chain link. The boundary between quarantine and the outside world was pierced once and for all, and then crash! With a cataclysmic sound of metal and plastic splattering against concrete, we hit the vehicle barrier both of us had forgotten about until that moment. The King Kong fist of inertia punched me in the back. My last memory before I blacked out was the filthy windshield about 1 inch from my face, and the seatbelt then yanking me roughly back. When I came to, the hood was crumpled up in front of me and John was shaking me, saying, "Get down!" Since I had temporarily forgotten where we even were, I also had forgotten what exactly I was ducking away from. I groggily turned to look outside of the driver's side window and saw a hulking camo-painted vehicle with no driver. I had no problem figuring out what it was. I saw a turret on top of it, light glinting off of a camera lens, and on either side of the lens were 2 massive gun barrels. The machine whirred and the barrels spun on me. The movement wasn't robotic at all, but quick and smooth and purposeful. I froze, mesmerized, staring into the twin black holes, and chose that moment to wonder what Marconi was talking about when he was going on about sacrifice. 8 hours earlier. Bing, bing, bing. The RV's door-open chime wafted through the frozen night. It was the soundtrack of Amy's last moments. The thing in front of her breathed, and its breath smelled of exotic dead meat. It sniffed her. A realization washed over her in that cold, dark space. This was how virtually all living things born on Earth have died, with teeth tearing through their muscle and bones. We humans have computers and soap and houses, but it doesn't change the fact that everything that walks is nothing but food for something else. A tongue licked her forehead. Amy instinctively threw up her hand to ward off her attacker and grabbed a handful of fur. Amy opened her eyes, and in the darkness found Molly staring back at her. Molly sniffed her again, turned, inspected the Pop-Tarts on the floor among the broken glass, then trotted over to the side door of the RV, staring at Amy and wagging her tail. Dog language for, "I need you to open this door for me because I do not possess hands." Strangely, that got Amy's legs moving again. Molly needed to go out. Amy had responded to that canine nonverbal cue 1,000 times. She moved quickly to the door, steeled herself, and pushed it open. Molly jumped into the night, into the still air that minutes ago had carried dying screams and the visceral crack of gunfire. Into the night, where teeth and mindless appetites waited, digesting the entrails of boys she'd been laughing and joking with an hour before. "Stop freaking yourself out and move!" Molly returned, looking at Amy expectantly. Amy stepped into the night air, crouching low, keeping her eyes focused on Molly to keep the terror at bay. The dog was not afraid. Amy got ready to run, trying to decide which direction to go. She looked at Molly, as if hoping for a suggestion. Molly made a beeline for the basement window. "No." Molly jumped over 2 piles of guts that used to be Josh and Donnie and disappeared into the cafeteria Amy had seen on the grainy camera. "No." From below, Molly barked. Amy decided that dying out here in the yard, in the open air, was somehow better than dying down in that dark basement. Molly barked again, but this time it was followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps behind her, somewhere in the night. A lot of them. Something was out here. Down there in the room, Molly was still alive and unharmed. Still, Amy half decided to just go running off into the night. But to where? She got down on hand and knees and crawled through grass that was slimy and sticky with blood and other bodily discharges that were never meant to leave the confines of their organs. Her knees squished through spilled entrails until she awkwardly climbed/fell through the window. Amy was blind in the darkness. The lantern was gone. The flashlight was gone. Molly was immediately at her side. Amy reached down to touch her, then grabbed her collar. Molly pulled her along, Amy using her as a seeing eye dog. Amy kicked a corpse and stumbled, catching herself via the pure desperation to not have to crawl through any more guts. Molly led her out of the room, into the hallway, and Amy tried to pull her away from the direction of the stairwell, and the maintenance room down there that she knew was now a mass grave. Molly would not budge, pulling the other way, heading for the stairs. No. Amy didn't care what Molly had in mind. She wasn't going down into that basement. Not now, not ever, not for $1 million. Not if her life depended on it. Amy pulled one way. Molly planted her feet and pulled the other. Fine. Amy let go and charged off into the darkness of the hall toward whatever lay at the opposite end of the stairs and the twitching, writhing tomb she knew lay below. She threw her hand in front of her, walking blind, and eventually found a metal door just like the one she was running from. A locked door. She ran her hand along the handle and deadbolt, hoping to find a lever, but instead finding a keyhole, one requiring a key she did not have. Clawed feet scratched up the floor tiles behind her, Molly coming back to say, "See?" Amy didn't move. She shivered. Her pants were wet. Her fingers were sticky with other people's blood. Molly barked. Amy grabbed her collar and allowed herself to be led down the hallway. They reached the end and the stairs. Down they went. They emerged onto the cell block, and there was the stench of sewage and gunpowder, and there were the doors and the scratching noises behind the doors. Amy blocked it all out. Molly pulled her along, and Amy knew where they were going. They reached the maintenance door. In the darkness, Amy ran her hand over it and felt puckered bullet holes. She closed her eyes, let out a breath, and said a silent prayer. She pushed the door open. What lay beyond the door was hell. Smoke filled the room, wafting between the rusting pipes and ducts that made the big room look like it was being attacked by a giant robot octopus. It stank like fireworks and burned cloth and scorched meat. A single tiny white shaft of light stabbed up from the center of the floor from a dropped flashlight. It illuminated just enough of the nightmare so that Amy would be seeing it for the rest of her life. Dead, open eyes stared up at the ceiling. Open mouths, twitching fingers. All of the bodies wearing the same solid color. She felt her stomach turn. Molly pulled free and stepped across corpses, trotting past the tiny shaft of light, continuing into the shadows beyond. She stopped at the opposite wall, looked back at Amy, and wagged her tail. Amy focused on the light. She was determined to block out everything else from this nightmare place. If she could just make it there, then she'd have a flashlight, and everything would be a bit better. She carefully stepped over limbs and squishy things and explored with her toes to find the solid floor in between. 1 step. 2. 3. Eventually, she got close enough to grab the flashlight, trying to block out the fact that it was curled in 3 dead fingers. She plucked out the light and made her way toward Molly. The smoke was getting to her now. Toxic, stinging fumes that burned her eyes. There was a hole in the wall. Cinder blocks had been smashed and knocked aside. This was where the monsters had tunneled into the room. She shined the light inside and found that wasn't quite right. The tunnel had already been there. It was made of brick and looked like the old-fashioned sewers they have under European cities. Old, rusty pipes and stuff. Did the zombies live down here? Under the town? Molly pushed past Amy, jumped, and scrambled up into the tunnel. "Molly, wait!" It was barely more than a whisper. The tunnel was crawling with bugs and dripping with muddy water. But that wasn't the worst of what she knew lurked in there. Molly scampered into the darkness, the scratches of her claws disappearing into God knew where. "Molly!" Amy shined the flashlight down the tunnel and saw 2 eyes reflecting back at her. Molly had stopped and looked back at her, but stayed where she was. "No, no, 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 no!" Amy climbed into the tunnel, realizing it wasn't tall enough for her to crouch. She would have to crawl, on her hand and knees, over the bricks. She started, realizing the flashlight was next to useless in her right hand, the beam whipping around crazily as she edged forward. She briefly thought about sticking the flashlight in her mouth, but pictured the dead hand that had been clutching it, and decided, no way. She pressed on. Amy crawled and crawled and crawled. The brick ate up her knees and the stump of her left hand and the knuckles of her right that were trying to simultaneously clutch the flashlight and act as her front paw. Molly had taken off, her claws echoing down the tunnel until not even the echoes could be heard, and Amy wondered how long this tunnel could possibly be. She crawled. Pain flared up each time a bony kneecap struck brick, grinding away at the paper-thin skin between the bone and the denim of her jeans. It seemed like she had crawled for miles and hours. Water dripped in her hair and on her back. She pushed through spiderwebs. She squished bugs under her hand. She thought she saw a rat scurry off at the sight of the flashlight beam. She had to stop and rest. She couldn't take the agony in her knees and fingers. The crawling was pulling and twisting at muscles she hadn't used since she had learned to walk. She stopped, pulled up her knees, and leaned up against the rusty pipes. She shined the light back the way she came. She could barely see the entrance to the tunnel. She shined it ahead of her. No end in sight. Her knees were wet and dark. Blood. She was turning her kneecaps into hamburger. A cockroach crawled across her lap and she swatted it away. Suddenly, the thought struck her, and in that moment, in that place, she believed it fully. She had died back in the RV, and now was in hell. This is what hell was. A cramped, dark, cold tunnel that you crawled through forever and ever, grinding away the skin and muscle and bone of your hands, and then your arms, and then your legs. Endless brick that chewed away your body until you were just a helpless lump for the insects and rats to come feed on forever. She heard a noise. Behind her, from the direction of the room full of dead. Something was coming. That got her moving again. She crawled faster than before, shutting out the pain, hoping that whatever was pursuing her was as poorly designed for crawling as she was. Time stood still. All that existed was the bricks and the darkness and the chilled breaths tearing in and out of her lungs. Scuffling over bricks from behind her. No way to tell how far behind. She tried to go faster, but she was crawling, and fast crawling was slower than slow walking. And as she inched slowly along the tunnel, she became sure this was a nightmare. The classic nightmare everyone has about being chased in the dark and you try to run but you can't. Suddenly, there was Molly, ahead to her left. Molly barked. There was an intersection in the tunnel, where you could continue straight or turn left. Molly wanted to take the turn, and Amy was in no position to argue. A few feet into the turn, the tunnel came to a dead end. It was blocked by wood, ancient and covered in mildew. Molly scratched at it. Amy crawled up and pushed Molly out of the way. She sat back on her butt and kicked the wooden barrier as hard as she could. It didn't break, but it bounced and cracked. She pounded it again, and again. Her pursuer got closer, slithering and slapping at the bricks. She heard it breathing. It would round the corner at any moment. She screamed like a karate master, lashing out with her exhausted legs, her muddy tennis shoes cracking against the board. And then there was no board. It flew away in one piece, slapping against a tile floor somewhere beyond. Amy scrambled out, climbed to her feet, and immediately fell over, the muscles in her thighs spasming and seizing from the crawl that seemed to have lasted weeks. She forced her way up and swept the flashlight around the room. Next to the tunnel exit she had crawled through was a vending machine of all things, full of bags of chips and cookies and candy bars. On the other side of it was about 3 feet of space between it and the wall. She went around, put her back to the machine and her feet on the wall and pushed. It tipped over and landed on its side with a crash that sounded like a building being demolished. It didn't block the tunnel entirely, but it blocked most of it. She got back to her feet and picked up the flashlight. There was one door out of the room. She was sure it would be locked, so sure, but it wasn't. And when she pulled it open, she was bathed in light. And just like that, she was suddenly in a spacious, well-lit office. There were a dozen computer workstations around the room. The computers were new. The desks were ancient. The place was empty, but looked like it had been vacated just minutes before. There were half-full cups of coffee sitting around. One chair still had a winter coat draped over the back. A manila folder had been dropped on the floor, spilling printed forms where it landed. A box of donuts had been knocked onto the floor nearby. Everyone had left in a hurry. Amy turned back to the door she had just entered and listened intently. Nothing from the other side. She checked to make sure Molly was in the room with her, then locked the deadbolt. She stood there a few minutes more, listening for the sound of someone or something struggling to push over the vending machine. She heard only her own pounding heart. Had she really even heard anything in the tunnel, or was she running from her own echoes, or a raccoon? Amy turned her attention back to the room. It was warmer in here, but not room warm. She did a loop around the room and found a pair of kerosene space heaters that somebody had remembered to turn off when they evacuated. She turned them back on, felt the warm air waft up at her, and she just stood there and shivered and wished she had a change of clothes. She smelled like sweat and mold and pee. There were 2 doors leading out of the room. She inspected one and found it was locked from the inside, and she decided to leave it that way. The other led to a tiny bathroom that she was shocked to find had running water. She ducked inside and spent several minutes going about the completely unnecessary, yet, in that moment, incredibly important task of cleaning herself up. There was a pump with antibacterial soap on the sink, and she pulled down her pants and scrubbed the raw skin on her knees. She cleaned her hand and her wrist and her glasses, and even got her hair down vaguely into hair shape. She got to where she recognized the face in the medicine cabinet mirror again. It helped. She emerged from the bathroom and out loud asked Molly, "So, where are we?" But that wasn't hard to figure out, was it? She drew a map in her head of the building and the tunnel thing that ran south toward the hospital. She had taken a left turn, and that would put her in the basement of that smaller building behind the asylum. This would have been the administration building, with all of the offices and stuff. Amy glanced around at the computer workstations and suddenly had a revelation that made her feel like Neo in The Matrix the first time he realized he had gained the power to stop bullets. This was the nerve center of the quarantine before the government abandoned it, and they left their computers behind. Figuring out which workstation she wanted was an easy choice. There was one that had 3 monitors attached to it. She held her breath and hit the power button. It came up, and she wondered how much electricity she had. The room had to have been running off of a generator, but the guys in charge of putting gas in it, or whatever, were gone. There was nothing to do for it but to work fast. The system booted, and a network password box came up. At this point, the question was how many passwords did the system require? There was a big difference between getting through 1 password and getting through 3. Getting through 3 would be much easier. She was, after all, at the workstation. She wasn't trying to break in remotely, which she couldn't do, but she knew people who could. And in the world of computer security, there is a threshold of just how many passwords a human can remember. Give them 1, and they're fine. 2, they're probably still okay. But give them 3, say 1 for the workstation, another for the network, and a third for whatever application they use, and they're going to have to start writing them down. She started opening creaky desk drawers and found the big one in the middle contained nothing but a box of ballpoint pens and a single post-it note with a list of nonsense words and characters. The first would be the username. The rest would be passwords. And just like that, she was in. She tried to make sense of what programs they had on their desktop, then noticed something that made her yelp with joy. This computer has internet access. Holy crap! She didn't even know where to start. She nervously checked both of the locked doors, still no sounds from the other side, and settled in at the workstation. The first task, she decided, would be to get a sense of the layout of the system and what exactly she had available to her. She found what they were using for email and saw tons and tons of messages in the inbox with attachments. status reports and equipment requests, and lots of other standardized forms. Bureaucratic spam. There were also long email exchanges about sound, reports and experiment results about frequencies and modulation and terms she had never heard before, like infrasound. The staff were sending audio clips back and forth, and huge walls of analytical text referring to them full of technical gibberish. She'd have to set all that aside for now. She could spend weeks trying to get through it all. She next found a program that, when she clicked on it, took over all 3 screens, filling them with banks of various camera feeds. Absolutely nothing was going on in most of them. You wouldn't know they were live if not for the occasional bit of trash that would blow into view, but they were clearly of the exterior of the hospital quarantine. She got out of that and found a separate application that gave her a full aerial view of the hospital grounds, rotating slowly, just like the gun camera video Josh had shown her earlier. She was going to hit escape to back out of it, but suddenly had the irrational fear that if she hit the wrong key, she'd see a missile come flying out of the bottom of the screen and blow everybody up. After a little more snooping, she found out that the aerial drone thing was controlled elsewhere, which made sense. You wouldn't control something like that from a keyboard. You'd want a control stick and all that. She was just watching the feed as a spectator. "David!" She saw him, because the camera view swung around and focused on him. She had no control over that. Whoever was operating the drone, wherever they were, had done it. The view blinked and zoomed in, then blinked and zoomed in again. It was David, plain as day, in a standoff with a big guy who looked really mad. They were surrounded by a crowd. Next to the huge bonfire Josh had said was some ceremonial thing, and no matter how she looked at it, it really did look like skulls and bones in there. There was radio chatter going back and forth in the video feed, but it was faint, and Amy couldn't make it out word for word. What she was able to gather was that the guy flying the drone was asking for permission to fire from a superior, and then Amy realized that she wasn't just watching this through a camera, but a gun camera, and that the gun was pointing right at David. "No, don't shoot!" she said stupidly at the computer monitor. She had to have some ability to contact them, right? There were landline phones here, and she would say, what? That she was a random girl who sneaked into the Reaper command center and that she didn't want them to shoot her zombie boyfriend? All that would do would alert them to the fact that they had an unauthorized person on their network and that they needed to remotely shut down everything. On the video feed, the big guy raised a gun, pointing it right at David. The camera view shifted slightly, putting the big guy in the crosshairs. "Yes, shoot that guy!" They didn't. She picked up enough of the radio chatter to get that the drone pilot, who she gathered went by the codename Guardian, had been told to stand by and await further orders. Several excruciating minutes later, David was hauled away and taken inside the hospital building, and the camera view zoomed back out so that it could see the whole yard and, presumably, any zombies who tried to make a run for the fence. The next most likely one to make a run for the fence, however, was David, if she knew him at all. And David was not a zombie. This was not wishful thinking on her part. When David was talking to the big gun guy, he was gesturing and conversing exactly the way David had the last time she had talked to him. David was no more a zombie than he had been 2 weeks ago, and Amy had faith that the drone operator, in fact, did not know that. He had been sold the same BS that Josh believed about murderous infected non-humans. Those things did exist. Amy just watched them eat the crew she had ridden down here with. One could burst in that tunnel at any second, but the people inside that fence were people, and the military was about to bomb them all. In the end, it took Amy an hour to make the connection. As a hacker, she was a novice, but she knew that by far the most effective way into any system was what hackers called social engineering. The biggest weakness in any network is the human beings. It doesn't matter how many firewalls or passwords you set up. In the end, the system was manned by people. Lazy, busy, harried people, who when all was said and done would take the path of least resistance. Figuring out where the drone pilot was operating from was easy. A Google search told her that unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV pilots, operated from only one location, Creech Air Force Base, just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Next, she went sifting through the email system to see if she could somehow get so lucky as to find emails from dronepilotdude@creechairforcebase.mil, but there was no such luck. What she did find was a series of emails flying back and forth from the day before, with various people clarifying the row, which she figured out was rules of engagement, with the Zulus in the quarantine, as apparently the drone had shot a guy who was attempting to climb the fence, and Amy gathered from reading 50 or so emails that they were supposed to wait until somebody actually got over the first fence before shooting. Somewhere, buried in all of these forms, she found an eyes-only document that had been sent to the guy who manned this workstation, some kind of after-action report on that incident that named the drone operator, a Captain Shane McInnes. This was part of an email thread that bounced back and forth between people with Reaper email addresses. The issue was the kid who had been shot, a 22-year-old male they were referring to only as Patient 2027. She sifted through a bundle of scanned eyes-only reports until she found some kind of admission form they were using for the quarantine. Everything was expressed in jargon and acronyms, but Amy was able to piece together that the kid had been held only because he was found in proximity to somebody else who was infected. The kid had killed that person with a baseball bat. But the relevant part of the report on the kid himself were these 5 words that ended the admission form. No signs of infection detected. Patient 2027 was not a zombie. He was just a kid, and now he was dead. One thing became clear when following the chain of emails on this subject. That particular fact had not been shared outside of a very small group of people in Reaper. Amy looked down at the clock. It was now 4 a.m., which would be 2 in the morning, Nevada time. The shooting happened at 3 p.m. yesterday. Obviously, it wasn't the same guy manning the drone all the time. Did they work some kind of regular shifts? If so, that meant Captain McInnes would be back behind the stick in the morning. It really didn't matter either way. That name was all she had. All right, start simple. Did Captain Shane McInnes have a Facebook page? She searched. Yes, he did. Set to private, which made sense for a guy in that line of work. She could break into that. Facebook's password reset request form was easy to fool, but she wasn't sure that'd get her what she wanted. Back to Google. She looked up the schools around where the Air Force Base was located, and searched for anything on Google with the names of the schools and McInnes in the same article. Boom. Nevaeh McInnes, point guard on the middle school basketball team. Wanna bet that's Captain McInnes' daughter? 13 years old, Amy knew she'd have a Facebook page. 10 seconds later, it was up on her screen. She had left everything public. Her pics, including shots of her posing with Dad in a dress uniform. Her friends list. There was Dad listed under family. Nevaeh had 132 Facebook friends. Amy sent her a friend request, wondering what time Nevaeh would wake up in the morning to check it. But Nevaeh was apparently a night owl because even at 2 in the morning her time, she was up to immediately accept a friend request from a total stranger 10 years older than her. Teenagers. 5 minutes later, Amy was chatting with Nevaeh McInnes, and realizing that this was going to have to be handled with some delicacy. Nevaeh McInnes. Who is this? Amy Sullivan. Hi, Nevaeh. This is going to sound really weird, but this is kind of an emergency and we don't have much time. Nevaeh McInnes. Nevaeh. Nevaeh McInnes. Not Nevaeh. Amy Sullivan. Oh, sorry. Nevaeh McInnes. It's heaven spelled backward. Amy Sullivan. Right, it's very pretty. Nevaeh McInnes. I can't sleep. Nevaeh McInnes. Chatting with my friend in Taiwan. Amy Sullivan. Anyway, this isn't a scam or anything. I'm not going to ask you for any money or account numbers, okay? Nevaeh McInnes. K. Amy Sullivan. And no naked pictures or anything like that. Nevaeh McInnes. I have a friend named Taylor. She's only a year older than me, and this guy emailed her and offered her a modeling contract, and then her mom drove her all the way to L.A. to have pictures taken. And you know what happened then? Amy Sullivan. Nevaeh, this is really important. I'm in...
Undisclosed.
Right now. Do you know what that means? Nevaeh McInnes. OMG, are you a zombie? Amy Sullivan. No, that's kind of the point. Nevaeh McInnes. Oh, wow. Don't tell anybody, but my dad is in the Air Force, and he flies a robot plane shooting zombies. Amy Sullivan. I know. Amy Sullivan. That's why I contacted you. Amy Sullivan. I'm here on the ground, and so is my boyfriend. Amy Sullivan. And we're not zombies. Amy Sullivan. But your dad doesn't know that. Nevaeh McInnes. He's in bed. Amy Sullivan. Okay, is he going to fly the robot tomorrow? Nevaeh McInnes. He's tired all the time. Nevaeh McInnes. I think so. Amy Sullivan. Nevaeh, I'm really scared. Amy Sullivan. We're all scared down here. Amy Sullivan. Because I think they're going to shoot all of us. Nevaeh McInnes. They won't do that. Amy Sullivan. I need you to make sure they don't. Amy Sullivan. I need you to talk to your dad. Nevaeh McInnes. I can't talk to him about his work. Nevaeh McInnes. He's not allowed to talk about it. Nevaeh McInnes. And he gets mad. Nevaeh McInnes. And he gets quiet. Nevaeh McInnes. He's tired all the time. Amy Sullivan. Then you have to let me talk to him. Nevaeh McInnes. He's in bed. Amy Sullivan. I just need his email address. There was a long, long pause without a response. This was the point where any caution young Nevaeh had developed about strangers on the internet should have triggered her alarm bells. Amy tried to picture the girl on the other end, almost 2,000 miles away. She imagined her simply closing her laptop and curling up in bed. Then she imagined her going into her father's room and trying to wake him up. Then she imagined her calling the police. Finally, the chat window blinked to life again, and an email address appeared. It was as simple as pulling up the email that had the attached form with the analysis of patient 2027 and forwarding it to the personal email account of UAV pilot Captain Shane McInnes. No signs of infection detected. The body of Amy's email was concise and to the point. Read this. The boy you shot was not a zombie. The people inside the quarantine are not infected. They are people. They are American citizens. You have been lied to. There were a million things that could go wrong with this. It could wind up in his spam folder. He might not even check his email in the morning before going on duty. He might dismiss it as a hoax. But she couldn't think of where else to go with it. All right. What next? After the drones, the other layer of security around the fence was the unmanned gun things. Amy brought up the bank of video screens, which she had figured out were feeds from those guns. Still a whole lot of nothing going on outside the fence. A series of static scenes tinged night vision green. She spent the next half hour poking around, trying to figure out how the guns worked. They were called Gladiators, long name Gladiator Tactical Unmanned Ground Vehicles, or TUGVs. They had diesel engines that both turned the wheels when they needed to move and charged onboard generators to keep themselves powered up. Just as with the aerial drone, she hit a brick wall when she tried to find an application that would let her actually control one of them. That was too bad, because she had this fantasy about taking one over and just rolling it around the fence, going on a robot shooting spree and taking out all of the others. But, again, she wasn't thinking. Those machines were military. The room she was in was Reaper. And no matter how hard she tried, she could not figure out who was operating them. She was getting frustrated at this point, but she knew that wouldn't help. This was a system, one set up by people, and it had flaws. What was the flaw here? Diesel. The Gladiators, or TUGVs or whatever, needed fuel, and that meant they needed people to fuel them. Even if the human operators were on a base in Japan, the refueling job had to be done by people here, on the ground, operating out of this very building, which meant that there had to be some mechanism by which they could disarm the guns so they wouldn't get shot when they approached them with gas cans. She just needed to find it, and she would. From the room behind her came the sound of metal scraping against floor. Something was pushing the vending machine out of the way. Amy sprang to her feet. She couldn't panic. She had a door on the opposite side of the room she could unlock and run through. Where it led, she didn't know, but she would get there as fast as her